Okay. So if anybody doesn't like the recording, they're allowed to leave the meeting, but hopefully nobody will. All right. Firstly, on behalf of the RPS Northern Ireland region, a big welcome to everybody who's come along. You're in for a real treat tonight. I first came across Keron, we were just chatting there about 2 months ago at a talk she was doing in the States. And I thought her work was absolutely wonderful and something I would like to introduce to an RPS audience. I was looking a little bit earlier on at her biography on her website, and I think she, in her biography, describes herself as a photographer, uh, a writer, an instructor, and a mentor. But the one thing I think she's left out of that is an artist. And I
Oh,
think foremost, you're definitely an artist, and we'll see some of the wonderful work you do this evening.
thank you,
Uh,
John.
yeah, I know you're going to talk about some of your Holocaust images, which has
Yes.
resulted in a book called Loss and Beauty,
Yes.
Operating Solace in a Land of Infinite Sorrow, which is just stunning work. And then the Cavallo Lusitano horses as well. I have a
Mhm.
particular interest in horses, are another piece of work that Karen's been involved in. And she seems to be very interested in creating books, which is something that I know a number of us have been interested in recently and are looking at the possibilities of doing something with Karen probably early on next year. So we'll chat more about that. But with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to Karen and say a big warm welcome from Northern Ireland in the UK. And thanks very much for agreeing to do the talk tonight. Over to you, Karen.
Thank you, John. I am delighted to be here and to meet new friends and to talk about something that I care very deeply about, and that is the long-term projects. And as you mentioned, books. I do believe that books are a lasting legacy. And it's important for us as photographers to contemplate how we're going to leave our work, because I can guarantee you that no one is going to look in our computers after we're gone. And so, for that reason, and for many others, because I've been a lifelong reader and lover of books and involved in the printing industry before I became a photographer, books are precious to me. So, thank you for that lovely introduction. John, may I share my screen then?
Yep, you
Yeah,
should be.
you're co-host, so you can share away.
Oh, thank you. That's not what I want to. There we go. Okay, I think that you're seeing the
Yeah,
keynote screen. All right,
we are. Yep. Mhm.
very good. I'm going to start play.
I can just say to people, can you all mute yourselves so that we don't get any extraneous noise during Carolyn's talk? So that would be helpful, please.
Thank you, John. Well, as I said, I'm going to speak with you tonight about the long-term project. Long-term projects for photographers help us to understand who we are as photographers and offer something deeply felt, deeply considered to our viewers, to our students, to our collectors. But most importantly, we learn much more about ourselves. Now, you see, I didn't even remember this was the next slide. Doing original work in any field, do so because they mind themselves deeply and bring up what is personal. So my students are always asking me how we discover our projects. And I have a one-word answer that is then followed up with a lot of conversation, and that is integration. When we think about integration, we have to think about what our strengths are, what our other creative endeavors are, our interests, our community activities, and our passions. And then we have to think visually. Does the project have visual appeal? Does it have something to say? And most importantly for me, does it say something about you as a photographer? When I talk with my students, I encourage them to go much more deeply into their subject and then remind them all through that what they're really doing, as Andre Kertész said, every photograph we make is an autobiographical piece. So we are putting ourselves into our photographs, and um, there's no escaping it. So let's put all of ourselves into our photographs. And then I encourage them to think about who is their ideal reader or viewer of photographs. This is a concept that I speak with Sam Abel, my mentor, about quite often. And an ideal reader should be, or viewer, should be someone whose aesthetic we admire and someone whose work we aspire to. In other words, to reach higher. And then there's this question about how do we sustain our projects? This is where commitment comes in. Long-term projects require a deep commitment. Therefore, they require passion. They require hard work. They require us to be able to sustain our project financially, emotionally, artistically. And that means, can you get to it? And that's a very good question for me. It's a question I ask myself. It's something that I discovered when I was doing the work and traveling back and forth for Loss and Beauty, beginning in 2011. To make the trip from, at that time, the United States, all the way to Poland or the Czech Republic or into Ukraine or Lithuania, I had to set aside time and I had to set aside finances. And that meant it was 2 weeks away from whatever else I was doing. And it was a big commitment. So we have to think about these things when we embark on a long-term project. But short-term projects keep us engaged visually, and they keep us happily creating. They keep us, my friend Charlie Waite says, visually agile. And those creative juices flow. If I had to put away my camera for the whole year, or in this case now a year and a half, before I could go to Poland and make another photograph, I would feel lost, bereft of something that brings me great joy. And so I try to think in terms of short-term projects as well. And this winter, I had a project photographing flowers and ice that I've called now Winter Garden. Photographing flowers and ice is not original, but it was a new challenge for me, and it was a lot of fun. The other thing that I think is so important with long-term projects is collaboration. We all have connections in our lives that are meaningful. So you have to think about yours. Perhaps it's a mentor, perhaps a fellow photographer that you want to take on a project with, a writer whom you want to work with, a board member. I mean, all kinds of connections exist that can create the perfect collaborator. And so that collaborator might be there with you as you're working through the whole project, or come in the end to help you polish and hone in on what you're trying to say with your project. But a shared aesthetic, or at very least, an appreciation for your aesthetic is key. And then possibly the most difficult part, clarity of concept. We add clarity of concept then to integration, commitment, and collaboration, and we have the possibility of creating a meaningful long-term project. Where does clarity of concept originate? And my answer goes back to integration. If we're integrating as many of our dimensions as possible, then we can yield that deeply meaningful project. For example, when I decided to try to create a project, I had no idea that it would be called Loss and Beauty. The title came later, but I knew that I wanted to do something to share my artistic expression or what I was feeling and what I wanted people to take away from what I was seeing. And so that integration comes from me being, as I mentioned before, a reader all of my life, a student of history, and a student of our current circumstance worldwide, in where we find ourselves repeating the same tragedies over and over and over. And so I was discovering, with the Holocaust as a backdrop, what we destroy when we hate. And so I use the Holocaust as a means to tell that story. So finding the relationships within ourselves, the common threads, that helps you to give clarity to your project. This is so true. So the question is, what is there to endure? We're just out having fun making photographs, right? For me, longing, wanting to be with the man who was soon to become my husband, loneliness, because it's a very lonely place to be, questioning, because every single person in my life, in my photographic life and my family life, did not want me to do this project. Every single person, each for different reasons, but they were adamantly opposed to my doing this project, including my mentor, Sam Abel. So there was this questioning, this doubt, there was resistance from everyone. And then of course, deprivation for choosing to do one thing, then we're not choosing to do something else. And did I say doubt? Or did I mention doubt? And then there's doubt. And in case you had a doubt, there's doubt. But we all do that as artists, right? We have this thing that just sits on our shoulder. And some of us are better at quietening that voice than others, but that's the doubt. So ignore it.
Can I ask,
Yes.
Keron, if you were getting so many people questioning whose opinion you value,
Mhm.
did you ever get to a stage where you had a wrong view that I really need to do this no matter what people say?
Oh, absolutely. And I actually, after I went in 2010 and came back and spent a year, and we'll get to that much more, but spent a year reading and investigating and reading and investigating and creating a platform of understanding for what I had seen, there was no doubt. That part I had no doubt about. Now, could I get it done? Yes. Could I make a photograph that had any meaning? Full of doubt. But that I had to try to do the project, I had no doubt. So that was a gift for me, absolutely a gift. So I have on the screen a few of the books that I've done, and we're going to start.
And there's a question, sorry, if you might.
I'm sorry? Sorry, John, you're breaking.
I think I have a delay in my line. Sorry, there's a question here from Peter Busby in the chat.
Okay.
Jerry, can you, Jerry or Hugh, can you read out the questions on the chat since my line is obviously a bit difficult?
Yeah, I'll read it, John. Peter asks, he said, I think Keron said the ideal viewer would be someone you admire, i.e.
Yes.
target high to raise your standards. But what if the intent of your project was mass impact? Wouldn't you set your ideal viewer lower in experience and expertise?
Oh, possibly. But if your target was to have maximum impact, and let's say, and I'm not sure if this is correct, but commercial impact or that kind of thing, then I would find someone who had an enormous amount of success, or a designer that was responsible for creating success in that way, and aspire to well, it's obviously there's a different focus for the project, but aspire even to refine and refine and refine, so that a person who had had a great deal of success would be thinking, huh, now why didn't I think of that? So it's just a constant bit of challenging ourselves and thinking about figuring out a person that might be our ideal reader helps to clarify that concept a little bit. It's a very good question. So on our screen, we're looking in the top left, the book that I'm going to speak with you about now, and that is Cavallo Lusitano. And then in the top right is Loss and Beauty, and we'll get to that next. But there are a bunch of other books, and there's a new project coming up as well that in the end I'll share with you. Cavallo Lusitano, The Spirit Within, is a fine press edition created in collaboration with Veritas Editions. They only publish fine press works, meaning very limited edition, generally original prints, and signed numbered editions of fewer than 25 or fewer, I should say. And from the very beginning, the publisher and I understood, well, I encouraged him to understand that every piece of Cavallo Lusitano had to relate to the Lusitano horse. I've been a rider most of my life, and in the mid 2000s, 2006, I started photographing the Lusitano horse. And I was struck immediately by the qualities of the Lusitano, being noble, courageous, gentle, spirited, but kind. And I set out to illustrate those qualities within the horse. But when I say putting a book together to illustrate all the different qualities of the horse, I had to think about things like the texture of the skin, what they look like when they're babies, how majestic they are, how classical they are, and ancient, and yet of this time as well. So those are the kinds of concepts I was considering when we were deciding how we would create the book. But first, I'm going to share some photographs with you. In the book, Cavallo Lusitano, all of the prints are original platinum palladium prints created by Stan Klimek, who is a master printer and prints still for people like George Tice and Sally Mann, the estate of Imogene Cunningham, Bruce Davidson. So to have him print my work, talk about finding an ideal reader or viewer, I was scared to death that Stan was going to say, no, I'm not interested in doing this work. In fact, he said quite the opposite, and he had a very good time doing it. Well, we had a good time together. So what we're seeing are photographs that I made early on in California, where I first met the Lusitano in person. And my progression with the Lusitano was from California to Brazil and finally to Portugal, where they're from. And for those of you who don't know, the Lusitano is the horse of kings. When we're looking at great masters' works of Charles II or other royalty, and they're sitting on a horse, it's an Iberic horse. So when I'm photographing the Lusitano, happily, all of the photographs that you're seeing are of horses that I know, and in most cases have ridden. And if they were too young to ride, then I've been around them more than 30 minutes or 2 days or what have you. I've known them since they were little. And so it's a great joy for me to be able to depict what I see in their characters. And they all do have an individual character. And you can see that this is a very quiet portrait, but this horse is a very gentle giant. He's the largest Lusitano I photographed, but he's also the most calm and most quiet and gentle, as I said. This is a photograph of a horse who's a world champion in working equitation, which is quite a demanding discipline. And now he's 32 years old. He was 30 years old when I photographed him here. No, 29, coming 30. And I wanted to bring forth the wisdom and all the miles that he'd traveled from Brazil to Europe and back a number of times. And he just seems to have a great font of wisdom in there. A young horse in Brazil, a 3-year-old champion. One of my favorite portraits of a horse. All natural light. You know, horses don't do strobes and lighting and that kind of thing, especially not stallions. These are all stallions that we're seeing. And finally, I'm moving on here to Portugal. This is a bullfighting horse. You know, there's a great heritage in Portugal of bullfighting from horseback. It's not the same bullfighting that you see in Spain, not at all, actually. And there's quite a ballet and choreography that goes on between the bull and the horse, and then amazing communication between the horse and rider. And often the very finest bullfighters will take off the bridle for the horse and, you know, do what they do bridleless, which is astounding because it's a very, very dangerous thing to confront a bull on a horse or on foot. This is the only photograph in the book that doesn't have a name. And I know that he's a Coimbra stallion. He came from the breeder Coimbra, but I don't know his name, but he represents for me every Lusitano because he has that kind eye and that gentleness of spirit. And this is a photogravure in the book. This is my late husband, Carlos Oliveira. Carlos was known around the world as the finest presenter and trainer of young horses. And when the book was first considered, my husband was still alive, but was killed shortly thereafter. And so the book became an homage to Carlos and to our shared love of the Lusitano. And for that, it had to be as fine as I could possibly make the book. So again, this is not platinum palladium, this is photogravure, and it's one of my favorite portraits of him. And so here we get to see a little bit of the book itself. But I should mention to you that the photographs that you've just seen, and there are a few more in the book, were made over a period of 15 years. And when the publisher came to me and asked me to consider doing this, he said, we need, 15 or so images, perhaps as many as 18. And as I got into the editing, I decided that I didn't have 15 or 18 images. And he said, well, you know, it's okay with me if we have 12 top tier images and then, you know, second tier images for a few. And I thought, no, I'll never have a chance to do this again. So they all have to be tremendous, or as tremendous as I can make them. And so I went off to Brazil for about 10 days, early in January of 2018. And this was after my husband had passed. And I seemed to be retracing our steps as we worked together and often traveled together to Brazil. And, you know, I had just nonstop photographer's luck, as we call it. So I was very fortunate.
One wee question there,
Yes.
Keron, just came up from Janet, saying it looks as if the prints are stuck in the book. Is that true?
Yes, they're all tipped in at the top. And if you were to lift that print that you see in the upper right-hand corner, you'd see that they're signed and numbered according to the edition of the book. They're also titled. And this is the way that fine press books are created. So if the print somehow became separated from the book, you would have the provenance that it went with edition number 6, for example.
Very good.
Okay. So as we look at this screen in the upper left, we can see the plate. It's an etched copper plate that sits into the walnut of Cavallo Lusitano. And I wanted a typeface that was classical and yet accessible. So we settled on Albertus typeface, and I'm very happy with that. In the lower left, we see a funny looking material kind of thing, and that's actually a piece of felt handmade by a wonderful artisan named Janice Arnold to represent the coat of a baby Lusitano. Between a year and 4 years, they start to lose their very dark coat that they're almost all are born with, and they dapple out, and 60% or so will turn white or silver by the time they're 6 or 7 years old. But I wanted that texture in there, and it holds the book, gives it a little bit of a soft landing inside this wooden drop spine case, and again brings in that quality, a quality of the Lusitano that I wanted to have be present. In the lower right corner, you see the top, the white in Italian silk is the book itself with the 15 prints and the 1 photogravure. And underneath of that, there's a portfolio of 3 vertical images, because the book is a horizontal format and the vertical images would not have worked. And the publisher and I wanted to offer people these 3 images that they could frame or display in another fashion without taking apart the book. Uh-oh. Here we are. And so the interior, you see, even on the cover of the book, we have that inset that is mimicked like we have on the outside. And you see the book open in the top right here. In the bottom left, we see the end leaves. And again, in the bottom right, this was one of the first pieces that I chose for the book because it looks like the coat of a Lusitano that I used to own. He's what we would call a Bayo or Isabel horse. And in the summertime when he's working and it was a little bit sweaty, then that's exactly what his coat looked like. And I thought, I want to bring this in because it marries then the ivory colors with the wood colors as well. And I was happy with that choice. Every bit of the book is letterpressed, meaning 1 page by 1 page by 1 page, handset type. And I think you can see a little bit of the impression in the lower left-hand image there. Of course, hand sewn. And what we see in the upper left-hand corner is a tab binding. So it's a larger sheet than the shape of the book, and it's folded over to create a thickness on the binding edge that matches as close as possible the thickness of the book itself with the tipped-in prints. The book is in Portuguese and in English, as it needed to be. And my favorite page in the book.
If I could, Keron, can I ask, effectively the book, once you get past the initial pages of the printed text, are blank pages that you just put prints into them? They're tipped in?
On the left-hand side, there is letterpress work of my caption that tells the story, perhaps about the horse, perhaps about my experience photographing, or why that particular horse was included in the book. So there's a bit of history and running commentary through there. I enjoy writing as well, and so that was a pleasure to do.
Yeah, looks stunning.
Thank you. So in the lower right-hand corner, we have, well, it's my second favorite page. My first is the portrait of my husband, but we see a page for all of the people who were involved in the project to have signed. And that went around the world, from Australia to England, here to Portugal, of course, and then all over the United States for all the people involved in the project, because I wanted to have them included. Without them, without that collaboration, Cavallo Lusitano would not be what it is. And so I mentioned before the separate portfolio, and here we see it. And John, you can see in the upper left, there's the caption and the writing, both in English and in Portuguese. So that was continued through with the portfolio. And underneath of that is a gum over palladium print. And there are 3 actually. So slightly different than the platinum palladium prints that are tipped into the book, but a gum over palladium in a Van Dyke brown, and just a little warmer, different feel for them. And here we see the case again. The cases were made by a wonderful fellow named Jim Fitzgerald, who's known for his view cameras. So, and the publisher asked him if he'd tackle the case, and lo and behold, he did. I came across this the other day and I just thought it was marvelous. A thing fills with exactly the radiance you accord it. Make the blind see, the dull feel, and the dead to live. And the best way I know how to do that is to, again, put as much of us into our work. And now I'd like to talk to you about loss and beauty. In the late fall of 2010, I was invited by a friend to take a road trip with he and his wife through Eastern Europe, into Czech Republic, and not into Poland that year, but through Eastern Germany and then on into the Czech Republic. And of course I said yes, because it's my habit to say yes to things like that. And as we were traveling, leaving the Netherlands, I saw a sign for Bergen-Belsen. And I asked Franz if we could go there. And he said, well, yes, of course, but why? And I said, well, you know, I'm a student of history and I know that Anne Frank perished here and I'd like to go. So that was the first stop. It was surreal for me. This is what I saw. And yes, this is, you know, intentional camera movement, but it was, as I said, late fall, and there were glorious golds and reds and oranges and these birch trees there, instead of what I imagine should be black and white and rain and barking dogs and, you know, all of those things that become lodged in our mind when we're thinking about the Holocaust. So I didn't know what to do photographically with what I was seeing. And we went further into Eastern Europe, into a town called Celle, C-E-L-L-E, and I came across these Stolperstein, and that translates into roughly into stumbling block. And they are markers that say Edward Bohm and Ermina Bomova lived here, were deported in 1941 to Lodz, and were murdered. Generally, they have their birth date and then the year that they were deported, and sometimes, if it's known, the date of their death. But again, I'm in Prague now, in the upper left-hand corner in the Jewish cemetery, which I couldn't make a meaningful photograph of. And then we went out to Theresienstadt, known, of course, today as Terezin, the original name for the town, and was in the small fortress and saw this office of a Gestapo captain or colonel or what have you, but still searching and trying to figure out how to make a photograph, a photograph that had something to say. Well, I figured out that I failed utterly. And so I went back home to West Virginia, and I spent a year, of course, traveling and working and doing all the things that I do, but also reading and reading and reading biography, history, poetry of the time, from the time, and about the time, to give myself a base from which to return and try to make a deeper, more meaningful photograph. So I went back, and I went back to Prague. I went back to Theresienstadt, and I felt like an idiot, like a complete idiot, because here I'd taken this time away. I'd spent the money to go. I'm planning on staying there for 10 days or so on the first trip, and walking around, stumbling around, having no idea what I was doing. And then I remembered my mentor, like he was sitting on my shoulder, saying, "Make the best available photograph. That's your only job." I didn't have to think about anything else. I didn't have to think about what shape the project would take or how it would be received or anything at all. I just remembered, take the best available photograph. And then all that pressure just went away. After I spent a number of days in Terezin, I decided that I had to go to Auschwitz on my own to complete the journey, as it were. At this point, I didn't know that this would become a long-term project. I just knew that I was there and wanted to know more and wanted to experience as much as I possibly could. So 7 hours in the car, and off I go to Auschwitz. This is Auschwitz-Birkenau. This photograph came much later in the project, actually in January of 2015, on the 70th commemoration of the liberation of Auschwitz. This is a photograph of an attic in Terezin. I had the great honor to be the first Westerner to be in this attic with a young man who had bought this apartment. And when he went upstairs in his attic to do some electrical work, he had a flashlight and he was just looking around, and then he saw marks on the walls. And lo and behold, every one of the walls had a poem, had a message, had a drawing or a painting, something that was left there by the victims in Terezin. And Lukas and I have since become friends, and I've gone many times to places that he is slowly getting to open up, that he can take people to go and see, take scholars to go and see, because every building in Terezin, which was a garrison town, every single building was used to house people, including the attics. And this work, what we're seeing here, had not and is still not documented in any kind of complete way. So that's undergoing right now. There's a close-up of this is the Charles Bridge. For those of you who have been to Prague, you'll recognize that with Castle Hill in the background. So this is the book. What you've seen so far are just single images, but what the project turned into after I came back to Portugal and back to sunlight and let the images rest for a while were composites of images that I had made. And they're composited because I felt that this was the best way that I could share the narrative and all the layers of things that I was feeling and the layers of things that I had learned over all of my reading, which I continue to do, and what I wanted to share with people. For example, on the left-hand side here, you see the rail, part of the railway in Auschwitz. And on the right-hand side, you see the rail station in Bohosevich. And Bohosevich was the town where victims came to then walk almost 2.5, 3 kilometers to Terezin. So they arrived at this station on the right-hand side, and then they left from this station as well. And of course, in the vast majority of cases, the final destination being Auschwitz or Auschwitz-Birkenau. In the book, Loss and Beauty, there are a couple of poems that I wrote, and each photograph has a caption as well. And this one, I'm speaking about the everyday mundane task of doing laundry. And the photograph is, again, a composite of 2 images. And the top right-hand triangle, if you will, is a photograph from an attic in Terezin where this camisole was hanging in the window and there's a blue pot and stove were there. Actually, it's quite a beautiful scene in the light. And then the lower left-hand corner is from the washroom in barrack number 11 in Auschwitz, which was the Gestapo barracks. And women were made to disrobe, fold their things neatly, again, this idea of laundry, and walk naked to be murdered in front of the death wall there between barracks number 10 and 11. So it's just my, I can't ever figure it out. None of us, I think, can figure it out, but it's just my thinking about what women must be going through. And again, this notion of laundry. So many journeys from tiny, tiny shtetls. And I photographed always during the winter because I wanted that additional feeling of isolation. And in all of the biographies and autobiographies from survivors and histories, they speak about what an additional layer of punishment the cold was, because we know, of course, that they didn't have coats and gloves and hats and warm boots. Often they were barefoot in the wintertime. And we're speaking about Poland, you know, terrible, terrible winters. The image that you see in front of you is a composite from the left to the right. There's an account of a woman who was walking into the barracks on the left-hand side, which is barracks number 25 in Birkenau, and she recognized her front door because the Germans would confiscate materials, houses, windows, doors, everything that they could use to build these hundreds upon hundreds of barracks in Birkenau. People always question whether that's composite, and truly it is. The image represents the long march before the liberation, when the Russians were coming and they had to walk between 70 and 700 kilometers to try to outpace the Russian advance. Deceit and cruelty. This Arbeit macht frei. This is seen in a number of places. This is the small fortress in Terezin. It was used in Dachau, and also, of course, we know in Auschwitz. But this kind of deceit, this level of deceit, was used in almost every stage of the victimization of of people during World War II. Lie, keep people calm, tell them something they can just possibly believe. It's horrific. This is a classic view of Birkenau, but my caption in the book speaks about what these places were before. Were they orchards? Were they farm fields? Were they marshes? And what will they be after? Because many of the areas in Poland and further east in Ukraine and in Belarus and in Lithuania and Latvia, ravines where mass killings took place are being covered over. And we have instances of elementary schools or parking lots or, just life marching on without any recognition of what took place in this site. This is a scene from the Bohemian countryside. And it's an original car, one of the cattle cars, actually 2 cars there. And I wonder if we can hear things late at night. And now we see the sign from Auschwitz, the Arbeit macht frei. This is one of these, this is a composite of an image from the columbarium in Terezin on the left-hand side. And of course, the gate on the right, the Arbeit macht frei in Auschwitz. And the reason it's composited is because the Germans told the prisoners in Terezin when they were losing their loved ones, more than 33,000 people in Terezin for that short time that they were there. They told them not to worry. The ashes will go with you when you move on to the next place. And they could see all of the ashes. They saw them being taken into the columbarium. But one night, late in 1943, the Germans took a detail of workers and took all 33,000 urns and dumped those ashes into a river nearby. And the people who were on that work detail were sent immediately, without going back to their barracks at all, were sent immediately to Auschwitz and murdered. So just one more instance of deceit. This image, I think, is probably the most successful at showing a psychological portrait. I spoke earlier about how punishing the cold was. And I just happened to, again, photographer's luck here. I was in the countryside north of Terezin, and there was hoarfrost everywhere. And it lasted nearly the entire day, which, as we know, is rare. But this photograph in the countryside, overlaid on one of the women's rooms in the barracks in the small fortress, illustrates what all the women were writing about or wrote about afterwards. And they said that they just wanted to go one more time to visit aunts or uncles or grandparents or parents in the countryside. And the cold is present, the isolation is present. And as I said, I think this is one of the most successful images from the project. This is up against a building in Auschwitz where the orchestra played. And the river that you see behind in the grassy area leading down to it was the place of piety that I described, where the ashes were discarded in Terezin. And I come from a musical background. My family on my mother's side are all musicians. And I could hear music there. And then I was thinking of the music and again, this level of deceit, this level of trickery, if you will, for people arriving in Auschwitz hearing music. And I overlaid it on this place that was really very silent. This is a rather involved photograph in the Gestapo headquarters, but if you look to the upper right of the image, you see a gallows there. And behind that gallows, you see the original crematorium in Auschwitz. And the gallows was erected in 1946 by the Poles, who tried and hung Rudolf Höss, who was the commandant at Auschwitz for more than 4 years. So we see the office of the Gestapo and then the final end, but we also see that original crematorium there in the reflection on the top of the desk. Layers and layers. Another thing that stood out, aside from the cold and what an extra level of punishment this was the psychological burden of never knowing when they were going to be transported from Terezin to Auschwitz. Early on, they just understood that going to the east was not a good fate. Later on, it became known what Auschwitz was, and some of the other places as well, Sobibor or Belzec or Sosnowiec. So this psychological burden was too much for many, many, many people to bear, and they had psychological breakdowns. And this photograph for me of a chair in an attic with a bag hanging on the wall, waiting to go, with this specter of the guard tower that we see in the seat of the chair, the barbed wire that we see, that specter always in the consciousness and always right behind. As I said, this is my attempt to show that psychological reality. And I come from a Protestant background, and any of us who have any idea of the nature of, or if we have an idea of the nature of God present on earth or in our lives, we have to come to some personal understanding if we're there making a serious inquiry about the Shoah. I don't have an understanding yet, but this photograph of the crucified Christ was made out in the countryside, and I overlaid it on this photograph of the latrine in Birkenau, not to mimic Damien Hirst, but to put it there because this was the one place where a religious ceremony could take place very, very quietly, or prayers could be offered, or thoughts could be had, because it was such an horrific place that none of the Gestapo or SS would enter into the latrines. And finally, as I said in the subtitle, creating solace in a land of infinite sorrow, there were moments of beauty and there are moments of hope. And this composite is one of those. This is the restored, glorious Spanish synagogue in Prague, overlaid on a still ruined synagogue in northeastern Poland, to remind us that all things are possible. And so you've not seen every image from Loss and Beauty, but you've seen a majority of them. But now I'm endeavoring to make work that tells us the story of what happened before Auschwitz came to be, before this monolith that we understand as Auschwitz came into its own, before it became the industrial killing machine that we understand. And I have to go back now and remember or remind us all that collaboration is key. This is Dr. Thomas Chubolsky. Thomas is the liaison between the Polish government and the Israeli government in matters of communication about Holocaust sites in Poland. He holds a double doctorate in international studies and does a lot of genealogical work as well. Is the liaison for the Shoah Foundation from the United States, as well as the United States Holocaust Memorial and Museum. So obviously a fellow who knows his stuff. And I've been very, very fortunate to have Tomasz as guide and as sounding board for all of my thoughts, and as proofreader, because the last thing I want to do is make a mistake. On my last trip there, Tomasz and I went to all 5 of the camps that were built before Auschwitz turned into the killing center that it is. And this is at Majdanek. This is Sobibor, which has been closed for a number of years to visitors, but because of his scholarly work and connections, he and I were able to go into Sobibor. And what you see beyond the stone demarcation there is a mountain of ash. It's covered over with a type of granite or schist, but it is simply a mountain of ash, hundreds of thousands of souls. This is an ash pond in Birkenau. a little tiny bird who had been prey for a much larger bird, I imagine. And now some new composites that were just made last year, and one that came to me somehow in the middle of the night, and I woke up with an idea. And here we have the birches growing out of the ash fields. And when I saw the little bird feathers, I couldn't help but think of the smallest victims of the Holocaust, which is why this is composited. This is a ghetto area in a city called Częstochowa. And Tomasz is telling me that it's, of all the places that he's been in Poland and Lithuania as well, this is the closest to how things would have looked absolutely during the war years. Nothing's been painted, wiring's not been updated, nothing at all like that. And the Jews from this ghetto in Częstochowa were taken about 3 kilometers outside of town to the Jewish cemetery that you see there in the bottom of the photograph and murdered en masse. And I left this in because this is a composite that doesn't work yet. And I really want it to work. But I found, over the years as I've been doing this, if I have to spend more than 10 minutes or so getting the composite together, then it won't happen. But what we see here on the right-hand side and in the bottom is the forest, a part of a forest in Lithuania where the partisans were hiding. And it's overlaid on one of these enormous pits in a town called Ponorai. And the killing at Ponorai of more than 100,000 people was the final catalyst for the final solution. They said, we can't continue to do this. We can't efficiently take care of the bodies. This just is not working, and we have to find a solution. This is a fresco from a 15th century synagogue overlaid on a ruined synagogue. But what we see in the center is the tree of Jesse, the tree of life. And life does remain. And as I mentioned, we visited all 5 of the initial camps from Belzec to Sobibor, Majdanek, Shalmno. And what we're looking at on the top is a photograph of the camp at Majdanek. And on the bottom is a frozen pond at Birkenau, which is an ash field. And what I'm illustrating here is what incredible steps the Nazis took to take lessons from each of those camps as they move forward, put them in books, make notes, scientific notes about, okay, well, we can do this and we can have 3 more people per minute killed if we do that. And all of this was combined to create what we know as Auschwitz-Birkenau, the most efficient industrial killing machine. So we have the beginning and the end here in this photograph. And yet another image of hope, this amazing, this enormous piece of material that is to give us the idea of a prayer shawl, was over this wonderful ceiling in a restored synagogue in the center of Poland. And I made a photograph just of the ceiling because the light coming through it was beautiful, and that moment was very peaceful. And I overlaid it on one of these, hundreds and hundreds of abandoned, destroyed synagogues, as if to say a benediction or a blessing that we remember. Just that. And finally, another image from the ash field in Birkenau, overlaid by a photograph of a piece of a wall in Terezin from the original crematorium there. The crematorium in Terezin was not put there to murder people, but simply to handle the number of people that were dying, mostly from disease and starvation. Nothing altered here at all. The sky was blue and the wall on the top was blue. It was one of the easiest composites that I've ever created. And so there we are, loss and beauty. Okay, we can all take a breath now. I'm sorry, I know it's very heavy. So today I'm announcing a new project, my latest book project that I've been working on for the last 5 months or so. And if I move, I think you can see the books behind me, all the beautiful colors. It's a set of books, 10 titles, limited to 15 copies of each, signed and numbered, the prints put in like we saw in Cavallo Lusitano. Archival prints in an accordion book block with a debossed custom sleeve, a bonus print on the outside that's matted, signed, and numbered. And the idea for this came because of the standalone photographs that I've made during all this time for Loss and Beauty Part 1 and 2, that no one ever sees. And they were not used to make composites. And I thought they should be seen. And so the title of that first volume is These Cannot Be Unseen. And the idea being that I want people to see them, but once you see this place, you can't unsee it as well. And so here we have all the beautiful colors because I love color. As we all do, there are a lot of dimensions to my photography, and it can't always be Holocaust and sadness and sorrow. I couldn't hold up to that. And so we see in the lower left there, the book that started it all, These Cannot Be Unseen, and then 9 other volumes. And one of them is, the title is Winter Garden, and that's from the ice flower exploration that I did this winter. And on the top right, on the very top, we see Longing, Still, and that's a series of landscapes from Scotland. And there are lots of other titles there, and that will become more of a formal announcement after the next couple of days, because I'm going to begin photographing all the bits and parts of the project and announcing it. So it's fun, but it's a lot of work still. It's a lot of handwork, but something that all of us can do. And I encourage each of you to be thinking about, as I said in the very beginning, creating that legacy of our work. So it's there for all of us to do. So concluding, we have clarity of concept, integration, commitment to our projects, and collaboration. And then there's one more thing, which is a marketing plan, but that's a whole different conversation. So, but it's one that I enjoy as well. So thank you. Thank you all for your attention. And thank you, John, for the invitation. And thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Keron. Quite incredible. I'd like to sort of open it up. There have been a number of comments throughout, so I'll maybe read a couple of them out, but I'll open it up while I'm reading these out. Think of your questions, guys, because this is your chance to ask Keron anything you want to ask. I mean, Peter Busby just said there, these are immense projects of immense importance. It speaks volumes of Keron's stamina as well as passion for the subjects and her amazing technical ability. He then had to leave for personal reasons, but
thank you, Peter.
I mean, I think somebody else, Cliff Harvey, said no need for comment, but it occurs to me that you must have had a very difficult and emotional time putting the composites together and probably shed a lot of tears as you did it.
Yes, Cliff, I absolutely did. And I will share with you what I found. Late 2011 was the first trip where I was intentionally trying to think of a project to do. I came back to Portugal. I texted my soon-to-be husband and I said, I need sunshine and care. And he said, what are you waiting for? So I flew back to Portugal and I let the photographs be for a while. I didn't touch them or didn't look at them for a couple of weeks. And when I did, then I was in light table format and they started to move a little bit. I could see immediately that the photographs wanted to go together. And I've never done a composited photographic project. Remember, Sam Abel is my mentor. And Sam is as straight a 35 millimeter full frame photographer as there ever has been. And so it was just really outside of my wheelhouse to do this. But it was very clear to me that that's what I needed to do. But I made 12 trips to do the first part of Loss and Beauty from late 2011 all the way through 2015. And every time I went to get on the plane, it was harder because I knew what I was letting myself in for. And every time I came back, whether it was back to the US or back home to Portugal, it took me longer to get out of that emotional space. And so knowing that, and then in the meantime, losing my husband in the tragic circumstance that happened, I didn't know if I could do part two. And so when I went for the first time in 2019 to begin the work, I didn't know if I could go into that emotional space. Well, what I discovered was that I have a nuanced understanding now of grief. And he's always
absolutely
helping. So,
absolutely incredible.
yeah.
If anybody wants to ask Keron anything, just unmute yourselves and ask away. As I say, this is your chance. Don't be shy, guys.
It's a subject that makes people quiet.
Yeah, I mean, it's a deeply moving, subject, and I think it's fair to say your interpretation has a sensitivity about it that is so rarely seen. I've seen lots of pictures of the Holocaust and concentration camps, and some of them deeply moving, but to bring together the elements that you did in a thoughtful way. I mean, the fact that you first went and didn't feel that you'd done it justice is maybe the right term,
Right.
and spent a year reading and thinking and contemplating and researching,
Yes.
just shows what's involved in a project of this scale and this level of
Yes.
artistry is probably the only word I can think of. It's quite incredible.
Thank you, John. At the bottom, I was afraid the whole time. And even before the first show went up, I was really afraid that I was going to offend someone, meaning a survivor or family member of a survivor. And what I found, which was a total shock to me, I've had many, many, many survivors come and speak to me during the exhibitions, and they're very shy at first. And most often they'll say to me, I don't know how to say this, but these images are beautiful. And I've neglected to tell you part of part of my reason for having the title be Loss and Beauty and creating solace. And this is very important. I can't believe I didn't say this. During that year where I was just completely devoted to reading and devouring information, I came across a book titled The Girls of Room 28. And this is a story of 14 girls who survived about age 13 and 14 when they were in Terezin and then on to Auschwitz. But they tell the story of having happy memories, of wonderful memories of friendships and even friends that they lost, but they were almost always centered around the creative act. So whether they were drawing or painting, performing music, listening to concerts, all of these things sustained them. And I found that even in the emotional turmoil that I was going through, to create work that I was connected to in a very deep way from my heart, but that act of creation was enough solace that I could keep going then. So.
Incredible.
Thank you.
Janet Haynes said that she also visited concentration camps and knows how emotionally upsetting it leaves you. It took her three days before she could even download her images, and then made a composite to honor those who went in and never came out. You're so brave to go back to make this work. And
Thank
Cliff
you.
said again, I will wait impatiently for a copy of the recording, and I plan on watching it many more times to keep me focused and grounded. My sincere thanks to Keron for her time and efforts this evening. And Michelle said, amazing work. Thank you so much for sharing. So I think most people have been deeply moved and also inspired. I mean, the contrast, as you say, you can't always do the Holocaust images. The fact that you're doing this new series of images and your Cavallo Lusitano work, which is equally incredible for different reasons.
Thank you.
I personally, than well. Because I think personally, I just love the whole idea of books, and we've talked about this, Keron, as you know, and it's something that I would like to explore personally. And I think it's something that as photographers, as you say, we can't, if we leave our images on a computer, they'll just disappear, or on
They
a
will.
hard drive, or
That's
even
right.
a USB stick or whatever. We need to either print or put them into books or whatever. And I think we're
That's right.
sometimes losing the knack of doing this in this digital world that we live in.
That's right. And while it's fun to come home and develop our images and do our slideshows and those things, which all have value, there's much greater value in the print. Charlie says that the print is the natural inheritance for the photograph. And I understand that. And what I love about books is that we can all do them, from doing a blurb book to doing a handmade book to doing, an insane production like Cavallo Lusitano. We can come into this at so many different levels, and all of them we get to put even more creativity and more refinement to. And that's really what I love about it. Yeah.
There was another thing came in there from Nick, just saying, hi, Keron. Thank you very so much for sharing your amazing work. You seem to have a real balanced approach to your projects. Do you always choose film over digital?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked, Nick, because in fact, all of my images are digitally captured. And so the platinum palladium went to, had to create a digital negative, which is its own process. And then they were, of course, contact prints from there. But yes, I am only and have only ever worked digitally. For all of my life earlier, I made photographs of my children, but I can't tell you what camera I used or anything at all about it. I didn't turn to photography until 2005. And from then on, I can tell you exactly where my tripod legs were standing. But yeah, so I'm rather late to it, but thank you for that.
I think from John said it very well earlier on, but looking at those composite images, they create a totally different emotion, very much emotional.
Yes.
It's not, we've seen many photographs of Auschwitz and the various camps, and very well done and dramatic, but there's just something about the way you've brought those things together that you almost don't need to know what it is. You can see what it is and everything else, but the emotion comes through. Certainly did to me very strongly,
Thank you.
I thought it was superb, absolutely superb.
Thank you. That's very kind. All I could think of, and all I continue to think of as I go back and continue the work, is that I'm just this vessel that the work is coming through. And I just have to do the best I can to give voice to what I'm seeing and what I'm feeling, and to have us think. Again, we've not learned anything. We are still destroying, and we still have hate, and so that has to stop.
Very strong, very strong.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And anybody else, any questions?
You can unmute yourselves if you want to ask a question.
Yeah. Do we need to type it even? A very quiet audience tonight.
I'm telling you, it's the subject. It makes everybody very quiet.
They're all stunned.
Yeah.
Stunned.
I think it's fair to say, just the quality of work. It's a thought that goes into each of your projects. I mean, I'm a great believer, anybody that knows me knows I'm a great believer in bodies of work. And a number of us here are involved in distinctions within the RPS, which is all around bodies of work, but you take it to a whole new level. And interestingly enough, the RPS have just introduced a new distinctions category for books specifically. And the whole idea of books is becoming more popular. It's more accessible to people nowadays. As you mentioned, you can go with blurb, you can go with different companies, or you can take it to the level of platinum prints in a handmade book with handmade felt and a walnut case, which is just stunning. And I remember a number of years ago buying a Michael Kenna book. I'm a big fan of Michael Kenna. And I don't know if you've ever seen his book on Hokkaido, where he made it on a very high quality paper with maple covers in a
Yes.
linen slipcase, and I have a signed copy of that in my collection. I collect books, and
Yes.
it is just stunning when you hold something that has that level of care and attention taken to it. So
That's right.
I look forward to the day of seeing yours.
Well, you know, what I want to say, and the reason I enjoy doing these talks so much is that if I can do it, anyone can do it. Like truly, anyone can do it. And, you know, yes, I had a lot of collaboration and maybe, you know, as I mentioned before, it's my habit to say yes to things. And I really strongly recommend that as a life choice. That's why I'm in Portugal. But we can all do it. And even if we go back to a blurb book, there's so many ways that we can refine that we can personalize blurb books and make really dear projects, very dear works of art. And I don't know anyone that wouldn't feel marvelous being the recipient of something like that. Because as you said, our goal is to show a level of care, a level of refinement, a level of thought. And when someone receives that, even when they don't know all of the mechanics of what went into it, they feel it. And we know that. We know that when we've created a photograph that says exactly what we wanted or communicates the feeling that we had when we were creating it, when it's successful and someone feels that, marvelous. Imagine having a book to give to someone that does the same thing.
And it's probably worth saying, Keron didn't mention, but her book on the horses, on the Lusitano horses, is in the Library of Congress Special Collection, the Getty Museum Special Collection, and if I've got the pronunciation right, the Equestrian Library at the Palacio Nacional in Portugal. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Very well done.
So
Yes,
you know,
that's correct.
when you put that much care into a book, it ends up in some very special places. And as I say, hopefully someday I'll actually physically see that book, because I think it'd be a real treat to see it in the flesh, so to speak.
Well, you're all invited to Portugal. I can, I've got room for 7 people to sleep here in the house, so come on down.
We're on our way.
Okay.
Yeah, flights are getting booked as you speak. So I know that a number of us are talking about actually trying to put together a workshop with Keron as well. So if there's wider interest in that, we can maybe do something even larger. So if anybody is interested, let me or Jerry know, and we'll take it from there.
Marvelous. That's wonderful.
Okay, well, if nobody has any other questions or comments, I would just like to say a huge thank you to Keron for taking the time and effort to present her most wonderful work. We've said just how good it is, as lots have already said, and it's not often that sort of words fail me in terms of expressing just how beautiful and how touching and how moving the work is. And I think, you know, when work touches you in that sort of special part of your heart, then you know that you've been successful with it, and that's where I think the true artist really comes out. So a huge thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to you all for spending this time with me. And I do hope that I get the chance to meet you in person. And I'm ready to get on a flight myself. So thank you. And thank you, John. What an honor for me. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Okay. Be well, everyone.
Honor is all ours. So thank you, Keron. And thank you everybody else for coming along tonight. It's great to be able to get people of Keron's stature speaking here with the RPS in Northern Ireland, and obviously much wider afield. So thank you all for taking the time, and have a nice evening, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Okay, see ya. Bye.
Thank you.